cartels, criminals, and so forth. And Mexico is an ineffective, if not outright failed state. And to do nothing about that border, to simply leave it open as we have, and to allow people to pour in from Latin America, it's a very dangerous proposition, because we do know that there are hostile Islamist cells operating out of South America that move up through Mexico and into the United States.
So when Ron Paul says, let's bring our army home, let's bring the troops home from, 170 countries around the world and have a national defense instead of an offense, it makes sense, huh?
Oh, absolutely. It does. The other thing is that, the media has helped to cultivate this imaginary world of threats directed at the United States. The truth is that most of the world does not hate the United States. Large numbers of people in the world don't think about us. Most of what is going on, particularly in the developing world, has nothing to do with us and has everything to do with problems in their countries. So when you intervene and when you are visible and you are seen as an aggressive military power, you become the focus of attention that would otherwise be completely ignored. So again, we need to largely withdraw from these places, and then we need to look at what we can do to foster good relations, and that is best done through business, which is in everybody's interest.
Well, I just have one question. Then we have a couple of callers, and somebody wants to ask you a question, if that's okay. But
sure.
Why are we persisting in this just boneheaded approach to foreign policy?
Yeah, but I think, unfortunately, that in the aftermath of World War II, Eisenhower did what he could to suppress it and restrain it. Senator Robert Taft, a prominent Republican, was the most eloquent spokesman on the subject, who warned after World War II that simply because we were the last man standing and we were wealthy and powerful and influential was not an invitation for us to involve ourselves in the affairs of the world. And unfortunately, people didn't listen, and as I said, you've got lots of moral hypocrites posturing inside the Beltway who continue to push this disastrous agenda.
Well, and I'll remind you of this, that remember, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Project for New American Centuries document said that now that we are the sole remaining superpower, we need to increase our power even more so, because now we're in a position to do that. Anyway, we do have a couple callers on the line. Let's go to Mike in Covington. You have a question for Colonel Macgregor?
Great. Thank you for taking my call. A question, how much of what our foreign policy is regarding the Middle East has to do with preserving the decades-old petrodollar system of forcing or keeping the denomination of oil sales in dollars, which gives a phony appetite for the dollar worldwide? And I'll listen to your call and hang up and listen.
Well, keep in mind that the oil protectorates, as we call them, in the Gulf Emirates and Saudi Arabia, that peninsula, all emerged in the aftermath of the Versailles Treaty, and they were originally British creations, and they were children of the British Empire, set up by the British to essentially provide unhindered access by the British to the oil that was in the region. We simply took responsibility for those protectorates once the British decided to withdraw in late 1960s from the Persian Gulf. There is a vast difference between helping to secure maritime access to the Persian Gulf, ensuring the flow of oil, which, by the way, is in everybody's interest. I mean, for instance, Japan, China, Korea, they represent 70% of the oil that Iran exports. So you can imagine that the Chinese, Japanese, and Koreans are in no way excited about sanctions because they're very dependent on the oil that comes from Iran. We're not interested in stopping it, and I've got news for everybody listening. The Iranians have no interest in closing the Strait of Hormuz because that's their principal source of income, and if they were to do it, they would only harm themselves. So I think an awful lot of the discussion has very little to do with reality and a great deal to do with the desire, once again, of that small elite in Washington to intervene with the objective of controlling events and ultimately shaping them in ways that they think are appropriate. And remember, you're talking about people that think they're morally superior.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That same sort of intrusive government that Ron Paul rails against overseas is also here at home. Remember, Ron Paul is a man who says, look, we're a bottom-up country. You know, the best decisions are made by families, communities, towns, cities, states, not in Washington, D.C. Well, the same people that want to intervene with American military power overseas are very anxious to tell everyone listening to your radio program where to live, how to think, what they should learn in school, what they will or won't do, what their values ought to be, and so forth.
And they're getting more and more forceful and developing more and more of the police state apparatus every day. So it's pretty scary.
All right, we have another call holding. Let's go to Mandeville. Bill, line 1.
Hey, how are you doing?
Hey, Bill.
I have a question for the Colonel. The question is, don't you think that with all of our military, in other countries and has been for so long, that we are handcuffed until we can become energy independent? And therefore, it seems like our first priority would be, A, to become energy independent, and B, do that by promoting this natural gas that's so abundant down here and put all the public vehicles and 18-wheelers on natural gas.
Well, first of all, Ron Paul is 100% behind developing our own internal resources. We're very fortunate. There's no other country in the world that is blessed with the kinds of resources that we have in terms of energy. We're the world's potential leader if we chose to be. So that's absolutely right. The second part of your question, though, I think there is some good news on the horizon. As it becomes more and more apparent that this $16 trillion debt is unsustainable and that we cannot afford what equates to this massive overseas empire, which is more of a burden than an asset, as empires always are, we're simply going to leave it. We're going to pull out. And we can afford to do so because most of the places that we have been interested in protecting are now eminently capable of protecting themselves. And many of these places, Japan, Korea, Germany, and elsewhere, are extremely well-off nations that have the scientific industrial capacity to defend themselves. And certainly the Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula, who are enormously wealthy, they have many options at their disposal. We don't necessarily have to maintain the huge presence that we have in the past.
All right, well, that will have to be the last question and the last word. Colonel Macgregor, thank you so much for joining us today. Your expertise has been very enlightening. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you for inviting me.
What's your website first, Colonel?
Well, you can just Google my name, or you can Google futuredefense.com, or simply douglasmacgregor.com. Any of those will eventually get you to the website.
All right, very good. I'll link to it at our website, baldyandtheblonde.com.
So you heard it, folks, from an expert in national security, a retired U.S. Army colonel. Ron Paul's ideas are right. And for those of you who haven't really looked into it and just go by what the mainstream media says, check out his opinion, because I'd say he and Michael Shire, our previous guest, the head of the Bin Laden CIA unit, all agree that Ron Paul is the man, so check it out.
And he also said that you walk the halls of the Pentagon these days, and they are in agreement with this policy. So
absolutely.
Anyway, we're going to be back after this news break. Check us out at baldyandtheblonde.com.
Did you know that Congress passed a new law that allows the government to jail Americans with no lawyer, no judge, no jury, no trial, forever?
Did you know the president claims he can order the killing of Americans with no evidence and no trial? He's already done it.
Did you know the TSA is planning to stop and search our cars on the interstates with no evidence of wrongdoing?
Is this the Soviet Union, East Germany, or communist Cuba?
Resist tyranny. Restore the republic. Tune in to Baldy and the Blonde Wednesdays at 5.
baldyandtheblonde.com.
I'm Michele Gaudin. And for 20